The forest smelled like rain before it ever fell. That's what I noticed first. Damp earth. Pine. The faint crackle of thunder somewhere in the distance. I adjusted the straps of my pack and quickened my pace to keep up with the group. We were 20 people, most of them college volunteers for the weekend hike and cleanup. I'd signed up half out of guilt, half out of boredom. The trail was long but beautiful carpets of moss, roots like knotted veins, sunlight streaming in thin slants between the tall trees. And then there was him. Ethan. The so-called creepy guy. At least, that's what I'd called him earlier when I thought he couldn't hear. He'd been staring too long at me while I tied my boots at the camp entrance, and I'd rolled my eyes to my friend Mia. Some guys have no sense of boundaries, I'd whispered. But when I looked closer, he wasn't even staring. He was just awkward. A bit too tall, shoulders hunched like he wanted to shrink into himself, hair damp from the mist. He had one of those shy half-smiles that didn't quite know if it was allowed to exist. Still, I'd brushed him off. Now, hours later, the wind had picked up, blowing cold fingers through the trees. A storm was creeping in. We needed to get to the camp clearing before it hit. My boots were soaked from the wet leaves, but I refused to slow down. Careful here, someone warned. I ignored it. I'd hiked before. I knew what I was doing. But the ground didn't care about that. My foot slipped on a mossy root, and, before I could even scream, my body pitched forward. Pain shot through my ankle like a hot knife. I grabbed at a branch, missed, and fell hard onto my side. The world tilted. Mud smeared my palms. "Hey," a voice called out. I blinked through the sudden sting in my eyes. Ethan was running toward me, of all people. I opened my mouth to tell him I was fine, but the words got stuck when I tried to move. White-hot pain lanced up my leg. "Don't," he said softly, kneeling beside me. His hands hovered over my ankle, steady but hesitant, like someone used to being told not to touch. "I think it's twisted." "I'm fine," I muttered. My pride burned hotter than the pain. "Yeah," he breathed, meeting my eyes for the first time. "You're really convincing." His sarcasm caught me off guard. I almost laughed. Behind us, the others were too far ahead, voices fading into the wind. The storm was moving faster than anyone expected, dark clouds already rolling over the treetops. Ethan glanced toward the trail, then back at me. "We need to get you out of here before that hits." "I can walk," I lied. "Sure." He stood, slipped off his jacket, and knelt again with surprising confidence. "Or I can carry you. Your call." I stared at him. The shy, awkward guy I dismissed earlier was offering no, deciding to carry me through a coming storm. "I'm heavier than I look," I said weakly. He didn't answer. He just slid one arm under my knees, the other around my back, and lifted me like it was nothing. The wind howled then, shaking the branches overhead. I curled instinctively into his chest as cold raindrops started to fall. His heart thudded beneath my ear, not fast, just steady. "Safe. Hold on," he murmured. I did. As we moved down the muddy trail, my earlier judgment of him burned in the pit of my stomach like shame. The wind roared through the trees, bending branches until they moaned. Rain poured harder now, hitting the forest floor like 1,000 tiny fists. Each drop stung against my skin, and my hair clung to my forehead in soaked strands. Ethan's jacket, which he'd somehow draped over me without asking, smelled faintly of cedar and soap. It was warm despite the downpour. I couldn't stop thinking about how steady his grip was. Every step he took was careful, measured, even as the trail turned into a ribbon of mud beneath us. His boots squelched, his breath came out in controlled bursts, but he didn't stumble once. "Why are you doing this?" I finally blurted. "Doing what?" His voice was calm, a quiet contrast to the chaos around us. "Carrying me. Helping me. You don't even know me." He adjusted his grip, careful not to jostle my ankle. "I don't need to know you to help you." That answer shouldn't have affected me as much as it did. It was so simple. Uncomplicated. Genuine. We moved through the forest in silence after that. The rest of the group was long gone, probably reaching the cabins by now. I felt a twinge of panic at the thought of being left behind, but then Ethan's arm tightened just slightly around me, not in a possessive way, but as if he was quietly saying, "I've got you." My heart didn't get the memo to stay neutral. "Are you okay?" he asked after a few minutes. I let out a shaky breath. Yeah, just embarrassed." He looked down at me, rain dripping from his lashes. "Because you fell?" "Because I called you creepy," I whispered before I could stop myself. His steps faltered, just for a second. His jaw flexed, but he didn't say anything right away. The rain filled the silence. Finally, he chuckled, but it wasn't the sarcastic kind. "Yeah, I heard that. I wanted the ground to swallow me whole. I'm sorry. That was unfair." He shrugged, still walking. "You don't owe me anything." "No," I insisted, my voice cracking a little. "I was wrong. I didn't even give you a chance to be anything else." His eyes softened when he glanced down at me again. "It's okay. I'm used to people making up their minds about me." That last line stung more than I expected. Used to it. Like it was something he'd lived with for a long time. The storm only got worse. Lightning cracked through the sky, a blinding flash that lit up the forest in white for a heartbeat. Thunder followed like a beast chasing us down. Ethan scanned the area, then veered off the main trail toward a cluster of tall pines. "There's an old ranger shelter not far from here," he shouted over the wind. "We'll wait it out there." My ankle throbbed with each movement, but I wasn't focused on the pain anymore. I was focused on him. On how someone I judged without a second thought was now the only thing standing between me and a night stranded in a storm. When we finally reached the shelter, a half-rotted wooden structure tucked into the hillside, Ethan kicked the door open with one solid push. He set me down on an old bench, his breath heavy now but not ragged. His shirt clung to him, rain-soaked, muscles flexing with every movement. He crouched down to check my ankle. "Can you move your toes?" I did, wincing. "Good. Not broken," he murmured. His hands were surprisingly warm, steady as they examined the swelling. I looked at him, really looked at him this time. The quiet way he focused. The faint crease between his brows when he concentrated. The way he kept giving me space even though we were trapped in a tiny shelter together. He wasn't creepy. He was kind. And I'd been cruel. "Ethan," I said softly. "Yeah, thank you for not letting me fall harder than I already did." He gave me the smallest smile, the kind that didn't need words to make my chest ache. "You're welcome." The thunder boomed outside again, but inside that small shelter, it felt warm for the first time all day. The storm raged outside like it was trying to tear the forest apart. Rain drummed on the roof in relentless waves, thunder rolled through the trees, and wind howled through the cracks in the wooden walls. Yet in that fragile space, the world felt quieter. Smaller. Like everything beyond those 4 damp boards had paused. Ethan crouched in front of me, wringing the water out of his shirt sleeves. His hair stuck to his forehead, strands curling slightly from the rain. I'd never noticed before how soft his features actually were beneath the awkward posture, kind eyes, a gentle mouth that rarely smiled wide, like it was afraid to be seen. "Does it hurt a lot?" he asked, nodding toward my ankle. "A little," I admitted, trying not to wince as I moved it. "But I think I'll live." "Good." He tore a strip of fabric from his flannel-over shirt, wrapped it around a nearby stick, and began fashioning something that looked suspiciously like a makeshift brace. His movements were careful, precise. I tilted my head. "You've done this before?" He didn't look up. "Boy Scouts. And, let's just say I have a habit of being in the wrong place at the right time." "That's oddly specific." He gave a small chuckle. "Long story." I watched his hands as he worked, steady, warm, methodical. The creepy guy I'd mocked hours earlier now sat on the damp floor, building something to keep me from being in pain. "I really was a jerk," I said quietly. Ethan paused, but didn't meet my eyes. "You don't have to keep apologizing." "I know. But I want to." My voice cracked, betraying the guilt I'd been swallowing since the moment he picked me up off the trail. "You didn't deserve that. And honestly, I didn't even know you. I just decided who you were in 1 second." He finally looked up. His gaze was steady, not angry, not bitter, just honest. "Yeah, people do that." "People shouldn't," I whispered. He didn't say anything after that. He just finished tying the brace and gently slid it under my ankle. When he tightened it, I gasped, and his eyes shot up, worried. Sorry. Too tight? No. It's good. Just cold. His hands lingered on my leg a second too long before he pulled them back like they'd been burned. He sat down against the opposite wall, legs stretched out, breathing a little heavier than before. The rain filled the silence between us. Why do you let people treat you like that? I asked. He blinked at me. Like what? Like they've already decided who you are before you even open your mouth. Ethan let out a breath that sounded tired. Not weak, just worn. Because trying to change their minds is exhausting. And sometimes it's easier to be the guy they whisper about than to keep proving I'm not. Something in my chest twisted. I didn't have a clever comeback this time. I just stared at him, really seeing him for the first time. Not the silhouette I'd built in my head, but the person sitting in front of me. You shouldn't have to prove it, I said softly. His eyes met mine then. A long, quiet stare. The kind that didn't need to be filled with words. My heart pounded against my ribs, each beat too loud. He was the same guy from this morning, the one I dismissed with a roll of my eyes. But I wasn't the same girl. Something had shifted. I was wrong about you, I whispered. Ethan gave a faint, almost fragile smile. Yeah, I know. I felt the sting of tears at the edges of my vision. Not because I was hurt, but because he'd said it like it wasn't the first time someone had admitted that too late. Thunder cracked again, but this time I didn't flinch. I leaned back against the wall, wrapped in his jacket, and for the first time since the trip started, I felt safe. For the first time since the trip started, I felt safe. The air inside the tiny shelter was damp and cold, but the silence between us grew strangely warm. Not the kind that presses against your lungs, begging for words to fill it, but the quiet that simply exists, steady, real. I shifted slightly, careful not to move my ankle too much. The brace he'd made was surprisingly good. It hurt less now, the dull ache softened into something manageable. I pulled his jacket tighter around my shoulders, breathing in that subtle cedar scent. Why'd you even come on this trip? I asked. Ethan leaned his head back against the wall, his hair still dripping from the rain. Needed a break. From people, mostly. I huffed a soft laugh. You decided a group hiking trip was the way to avoid people? His lips curved slightly. Yeah, not my best plan. I thought maybe in the woods, people would stop, noticing me. Noticing you how? His eyes flicked to me briefly, then away again. Like I don't belong anywhere. Something about the way he said it made my chest tighten. The world outside the shelter thundered on, but in here, it was just us, two people who barely knew each other, sitting under a leaking roof while the storm raged. I wrapped my arms around my knees, ignoring the damp seeping through my clothes. I used to feel that way in high school. Like no matter what I did, people had already made up their minds about me. He raised an eyebrow. You? Miss, I'll lead the charge. I smirked at the mocking lilt in his voice. I wasn't always like that. Confidence came later. But yeah, back then, I was just the weird girl who argued too much. Ethan let out a soft laugh. It was low, rough at the edges, like he wasn't used to doing it out loud. Guess we're both misunderstood. Yeah, I breathed. Except I became loud so people would stop underestimating me. And you, I gestured vaguely at him. You just stayed quiet. His gaze met mine steady, searching. Maybe I just got tired of trying. My heart twisted again, not out of pity, but something deeper. Something warm and unfamiliar. The wind howled outside, rattling the door on its loose hinges. A thin stream of water dripped from a crack in the roof, pooling on the dirt floor. Ethan pushed himself up and grabbed a piece of tarp from a dusty corner, positioning it above the leak like it was second nature. Always fixing things, I murmured without thinking. He gave me a sidelong glance. Someone's gotta. And there it was, that quiet strength I hadn't seen before. It wasn't loud, didn't demand attention. It was the kind of strength that held up the world silently in the background. When he sat back down beside me this time, we were closer than before. Not touching, but close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from his body. My pulse jumped for no logical reason. Ethan, I said softly, tasting his name like it was the first time I'd let it fully exist on my tongue. Yeah, I really was wrong about you. He gave a half smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. People usually are. This time, instead of letting that sit like a wall between us, I leaned slightly closer. I don't want to be people. That startled him. His eyes widened just a fraction, but he didn't move away. You're not, he whispered after a moment. The storm outside was still brutal, but it felt distant now. The real storm was inside me, this slow, quiet stirring that had started somewhere between his arms on the trail and his hands wrapping my ankle. I didn't know what it was yet, but I knew it wasn't going away. I want to know the rest of that long story, I said suddenly. Ethan tilted his head, amused. What long story? The one about you always being in the wrong place at the right time. He gave a short laugh and shook his head. You're persistent. Guilty, I said with a grin. He leaned his head back again, exhaling slowly. Fine. But it's not that interesting. As he began to talk, his voice softened, and I found myself leaning in, listening, not out of obligation, but because I genuinely wanted to. And just like that, somewhere in the middle of a storm and a broken ankle, my walls began to crumble. The storm was gone by morning, leaving behind a forest washed clean and glistening in the pale sunlight. Mist still lingered between the trees like a soft veil. Birds began to sing again, timidly at first, then louder, as if testing whether the world was safe to wake up. I blinked against the light leaking through the shelter's cracks. My ankle throbbed, but the pain was dull now, manageable. Ethan was still beside me, sitting cross-legged with his back against the wall. He hadn't fallen asleep. Instead, he'd spent the night keeping the tarp in place, adjusting the brace, checking the door every time the wind howled too hard. For someone I'd once rolled my eyes at, he'd become my anchor. You didn't sleep, I said softly. He turned to me, his hair a mess, eyes tired but still warm. Didn't want the roof to cave in on you. You're impossible, I muttered, but my voice came out gentler than I expected. He smiled. So I've been told. The silence that followed wasn't awkward anymore. It wasn't filled with my judgments or his hesitations. It just was. Real. When I tried to stand, pain shot through my ankle and I winced. Before I could even ask, Ethan was already moving, crouching down in front of me. I can carry you again, he said, his tone casual, but his hands steady. I started to protest, but then I saw it. Not pity. Not expectation. Just quiet care. Okay, I whispered. He lifted me like it was nothing, just as he had in the storm, except now it wasn't adrenaline or panic. It was something softer. The forest was breathtaking in the aftermath of the storm. Water dripped from the leaves like diamonds. The ground squelched beneath his boots. Sunlight scattered through the branches, catching the steam rising from the earth. And in the middle of it all, I clung to his shoulders, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. I'm sorry again, I murmured against the side of his neck. For what this time? He asked, amused. For judging you before I ever spoke to you. For making you that guy in my head. You didn't deserve that. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, thank you for saying that. I tightened my arms around him just a little, letting the warmth of his body seep into mine. When we finally caught up to the group at the camp clearing, the others rushed toward us in a flurry of questions. Someone called for the ranger. Someone else grabbed my bag. But all I could see was Ethan lowering me gently onto a log like I was made of glass. Mia knelt beside me, her eyes wide. Oh my God, are you okay? What happened? I slipped, I said. My gaze flicked back to Ethan, who was already stepping away, hands shoved in his pockets like he wanted to disappear into the background again. But not this time. Hey, I called. He paused. I reached out my hand not because I needed help, but because I wanted him near. For a split second, something unguarded flickered across his face, and then he walked back toward me, kneeling down so we were eye to eye. You saved me, I said softly. He shrugged. Anyone would've. No, I cut in. Not anyone. You. It was just me and him. Ethan's gaze held mine for what felt like forever. Then that quiet smile, the one that had lived in the corners of his mouth all night, finally reached his eyes. You're stubborn, he whispered. And you're still impossible, I whispered back. We both laughed then, not awkwardly, not nervously. Just freely.